Photoshop, it's the king and the queen at the same time of the image editing world. Okay, so if you want to edit an image, the best place to go is Photoshop. There's no other one as good. Many other ones are out there for minimal tweaks, which could be valid for you, but in terms of sophistication and complexities, the best way is using this software. So I recommend you know the basics and then you expand on those. I've noticed that they recently incorporated some of the Adobe stock, they call it, is you can download a lot of images by department. So, and I think if you have subscription by Thomas Jefferson University, you can get, all kinds of images. We tend to use a lot of images sometimes for references or whatever it is, or a background or a rendering or whatever it is, a diagram. So maybe here you can get some interesting ideas. You can also create variations with AI generative tools so that you can say, give me a fish jumping here or whatever it is, you can get those. But I think it's not a bad kind of a tool or space to find some basic images to reference. Okay. How does Photoshop work? Well, it's relatively simple at first, but it might become a little more complex as you move into the program. So I say new file, you have the classic options of any Adobe, like InDesign and Illustrator. You can create different sizes if it's print, but it could be for a web purpose, so it's a pixelated environment. I typically like printing because that's an easier way to think about images. So I'm going to use the letter size, and the sizes can be obviously changed here for your own accommodation. You can change the background color if you want, but typically you can do that later on as well. Say create. It's going to look very similar to all of the Adobe ones that we already know. So the toolbars are here for the actions, and these are for more of the control mechanisms like properties of the color, swatches, grading colors that you may want, some patterns. There's a lot of stuff. Obviously, layers. It's even if you don't use layers, you're gonna have to work with layers in Photoshop. Otherwise, you're not gonna be able to work properly. And there are many other tools that you can find under Window. There are literally hundreds probably. So it's quite a vast software. If you're starting with a white canvas, there are things that you can do with Photoshop, such as painting, and you can paint with the parameters that are shown in the top with this type of brush, which is soft, or that one that is less soft. And you can paint with a thicker brush, and the circle of the gumball changes as you change this element. No? The hardness is basically the softness and hardness of the brush. So if you were to use 3, then this is a blue. That's the colors. The color on the top is the foreground and background. When you do an action, you're using the front color. So if I were to change the color here, then I will be able to paint with that color. Okay. There you go. So if I change the process, I can make it harder and I can make it smaller, and then I can change the color of that, and it could be green. Say okay. And that's it. So again, you can change with the process a bunch of parameters that allows you to paint. And this is not only good for painting purposes, but also for erasing. So if you use the eraser, which is a E shortcut, which shortcuts are the same as any other Adobe, just wait for the explanation of the toolbar. And then you can just see the shortcut in the box is Y. So, okay. The process for erasers are the same. So just the same dimensions. And then you can also change with different intensities. So you can say, I want to erase 100% of whatever I go through. So I can do this, what about a eraser, and I can change the brush. Oh, because the background is that, eh? So it's just changing that color. Wait a minute. So I'm erasing here using the eraser with a brush of 114 and then hardness 51. But if I go to a softer eraser, you can do shortcut for the same thing. Just now I'm going to do a softer, and that's, you can tell the difference between erasing with a softer edge. And then you can go to opacity and you'd say something like 30%, and then you're erasing only somehow. So this type of results, you can't see it very well there, but I'm erasing just 30% with a softer edge. This is the clue, one of the most important clues for image editing, because if you want to erase only partially something of an image, this is the way you do it. E for erasing, and then opacity plus soft hardness. So, okay. And I'll explain in a second now. Okay, so this is more like the brush world. I'm gonna open the images I got. You can open as many images as you want. They will all be collected here. You can go from one to another one by clicking on the top or by just control tabbing. There's no difference. And the question of Photoshop that is powerful is that you can bring from another place stuff. No? So you might want to go to the web, and now that we have the stock here, you can just search for persons and images. And I'm just gonna go cartoonish, see if I can download this thing. JPEG. And I can also open that one. And if I love this type of let me close Reddit because my computer's freaking out. Okay, so this is obviously a problem, you would say, but I really love these cartoons. So I'm going to take these guys. So there's a tool M, which is selecting tool, and you can select with the lasso tool as well. Either way, you could just go start clicking. Normally I use the polygonal lasso tool, and you click once, twice. You can move with the space bar as you select. So you can be very precise or not. In this case, I have a very strong background, so I don't really need to be that picky. I'm going to say Control C, and I'm going to bring this cartoon over here. And I'm going to do Control V. So Control C and Control V is also an important one. The second I did Control V, this is what happened. A new layer appears that I can turn off and on. It's probably good that you rename these things, persons, so you know what is going on. Although I'll probably have many persons, so like that. And I can zoom in with a Z tool, which is shortcut Z. I can right click on the zoom and say fit on screen. I also can press Alt while I am in the zoom tools to go out, but I can do zoom window. So I can go forward, right click, and go fast from one to another one. Anyway, there's a tool, magic one is W. Here it is. This allows you to select the same type of color consistently in one click. So if I actually go to one tool, which is this guy, and I select this white, it selects everything that is white. And now I can say something like Control X. Control X is cut versus copy. I don't need it, so I'm just going to leave it there. And I'm going to now transform this image. Now, one of the big things of Photoshop is also the easiness in transforming layers. So you can always just do the simple thing as going to the layer and Control T as in transform. You can transform in many ways. You can transform now as scale. You probably want to have it in particular place. Make sure that the scale is adequate with the height of the other person. And then once you're done, you place Enter. Now there are many transformation options. Control T allows you to also right click and say not only scale, but rotate, of course. Control C that, right click, have skew. So if you want to do that skewing, you have the distort, different points can do different things. And then you have the warp, which is more points of control. You never know when you're going to be needing those. But, another thing would be maybe to try to get rid of these things. So you can also start selecting L and do something here, like a selection here. And I'm going to just fix this. I'm going to say I. I stands for eyedropper tool. So I can select this, and it basically takes that color into the top. So then I can just brush on top of it with that color. So there you go. I can do that in a couple of occasions. This is an issue of cleaning up. So and then the brush. So select. B for brush. But I'm just brush. I don't want to do more of that. I know there's another one here, but anyway, it's not a big deal. I think you get the idea. And all of this time I'm in the same layer, so I'm not painting anywhere else. Okay, so I can move this around, this guy. Okay, so things that we can do to a layer. Well, we can do many things to a layer, but among them, the most easiest one is select the layer and change the transparency level to that. So that's something we can do. It's just so that already can give you some interesting thing to do. You can turn it off and do whatever you want. But another thing before I introduce to that layer something is that if we receive a rendering from Revit or any other software, I recommend that you try to improve the quality of depth, the quality of lighting, and resolution. So to do that, the best place to go is under adjustments. Now I'm in that layer, so it's not finding, but if I go to the background layer and I go to adjustments, and then there's a couple of options that I recommend everybody does with every single rendering. So one of them is levels. Levels allows you to change contrast, lighting, and depth. So the way this works is that it has two little knobs here that you can take them to the left. So notice what happens as I do that and as I do this. So typically you take these guys a little bit to the center and these ones, and you can change that one to give more light or less light. So if it's a more dark environment, you take it to the bottom. If it's the opposite, you take it to the top. These minor changes can really improve your sense of depth. If you want to go back, you go Control C. Okay. So that's something you can do. But again, image adjustments and levels, I think these ones are quite important. You might not see in the screen very well the changes, but even if they're minor, they're quite powerful. Okay, so that's one. I would always reconsider the color saturation. So you can go to hue and saturation and spend here at least 15 to 20 minutes figuring out, well, this is too yellow of a color. Maybe I get rid of some of the yellow. Just go towards the blues, or you go towards the greens. And you might think it's too colorful, has too much of intensity. My project is more about severity, so you want to take the saturation down slightly. You still have the color, but it's a bit more realistic in the coloring factor. And then lightness here, I don't change it typically because I think the levels does a better job at that. But I think desaturating on your images when they're oftentimes very charged with color, I think it's a good idea. Unless your project is a bit more poppy and you want to take the colors, you might want to go in the opposite direction and increase the color, filter. I think this one you should all think about it, and I think it's connected with how your project is. Is it a fun, kind of a happy, young type of space? Then you might want to increase a little bit the saturation, change a little the filters for the hue, and make it brighter. But if it's maybe it's a store that your client is more of a jewelry that is about seriousness, you might want to rethink your tonation and your colors variations. You might want to take it a little bit lower to desaturating it. Okay. So there are other important ones. I think you can use the brightness and contrast as well. It's a very simple one that allows you to give more light or less, and then more contrast. This is oftentimes good because it also defines with more preciseness. For example, this column here, it will pop out much more if I increase the contrast. But if I take it down, it kind of disappears. I don't know if you feel that. Anyway, that's a good one to use. I mean, all of these ones are quite good. Exposure is more of a smarty type of lighting. So you can use that if you want to give more powerful lighting quality. You can invert this. I don't know why would you want that, but sometimes it could be interesting. There's a world of filters. That's another side that it might be helpful in some of your projects. You can blur things. Sometimes it gives it a nice quality. Blurring basically means to make it fuzzier, no? So you can use the box blur, which is not ideal, but if you reduce this, it could give you more of a dreamy feeling. You might not want to do that, but we will use it for other things. There's all kinds of blurs. There's motion blurs and so on. There's a blur gallery. And there's a bunch of filters. I recommend you take a look. Some of them are interesting, but for some particular projects could be nice, but other ones are just over, I don't know how to call it. Let me see if I find an example. They tend to be like trendy, so some people might use some of them and they might be just trendy at the moment, but they fade away in their importance quite easily. So you can use this technique for cementing it. You might want the watery feeling into it because your project is like that. Um, I don't know. There's mosaic options. This is basically to give it a feeling of low res intentionally. So who knows? You might want that. Basically, the filters could be good if you're doing some kind of an art piece or some, imagine you're doing a wall image in your project and you want to use an image of your project or rendering, but you don't want it exactly. So you might want to play with the filters and do something fun and cool. Um, I don't know. There's so many of them. Okay. Okay, that's a quite important tool as well. I'm going to open a different one. Imagine, let me see if the other ones are better for that. Okay, this one could be good. Imagine I have this rendering and I want more light into this part. I could potentially do the levels and take this, more illuminated, the whole thing. But that's burning this side. So I'm trying to illuminate this, but not this side. So how do I go about it? Well, I don't know. One thing would be to just go to the selection tool, select half of it, Control C, Control V. So I have two of the same in the same space. And then for this layer on the top, I can do more brightness and contrast and give it light, no? But this is going to create weird stuff. So this definitely doesn't work. So here's how we go about it. Um, and it's actually a quite powerful tool and recommended in many ways. So first thing we need to do is the background is locked. So you double click on the background to get rid of that lock-in condition. So you say, okay, and it creates just as if it was a layer you can turn off and on, and the background now is transparent. Okay, now what I'm going to do is duplicate this layer. You can duplicate as you can do many other things for every single layer. So I can duplicate, that means that I can give it a name and just copy for now. So I have two of the same on top of each other now. The technique will be, I'm going to use this one as a kind of a framing that reveals the one in the bottom through transparency strokes. So what we need to do now is create a mask, which is this little guy. It creates a link symbol and then a white canvas. Okay, so I'm going to do something, kind of a very big change to this one so you understand, I hope. I'm going to create a levels here and make it like a complete dark environment or illuminated. So the one in the bottom is completely burned. Okay, and what I'm going to do is paint here on the white canvas with a black and white brush. So I'm going to use black and white brush, and now I'm going to click on the white thing. I'm going to change the brush to a bigger one, and I'm going to let's just do the test. I'm going to do this. So I don't know if you see what I'm doing here. I don't know if you can see that this white little canvas has the same lines and curves I drew here. They're in black on top of it. And what it's doing is that it's revealing every single black area of that canvas is a transparency tunnel that reveals the layer behind it. Okay. This is a great tool because if it's an issue of black and white, I can repaint with white. So I'm gonna change the foreground color and I'm gonna just paint black on top of it. So I can paint again and return to the previous position without having to do Control Z, Control V type of thing. It's basically always editable, no? So let me go back to the process that we should follow. So this is to burn. What we should follow is we have the two layers with the mask. And now in the lower level layer, I'm going to introduce the change of lighting that I need for this particular area. So I definitely need more light there. Okay, so now I like how it's looking there. It's definitely too burnt there, so I don't like that. I'll say okay. But in the top one, I click on the white canvas and I paint in black in the areas that I want to rebuild. But in this case, it's going to have to be a very big brush. And I'm going to use an opacity of 50% so I can control, how much and think about it carefully, So I'm going to paint there with a brush, black, 50%, and I can start painting here. I don't know if you see the white canvas is adding that black color there. I remember it was much better here as well in this area. But I think that was it. Maybe here on the ceiling. And actually now I realize there's too much light on with these illuminances. So I'm gonna change to the white, make the brush smaller, not too small, and paint over here because that's a bit too much. That's where the illuminance is. Okay, so now I think we have something of interest. Here we have, I have controlled the amount of light that is here in this area, in this one as well, and also in the light fixture by, adding black and white tonalities to this frame. I might change my mind and I can just go back to white and black and paint over with no problem. But at this point, I'm happy with the possibilities of having this lighter and not affecting this, etc., etc. Another thing you can do is add what is called the different options of control. So you can change the levels that I talked about before, the brightness and these are the same as the image options. But instead of, if I actually go here and say image, adjustments, and levels, and I change that, and I move on, that's it. That's one time. I can't go back and change those again, which typically is it's a pain. You might want to change your mind or whatever it is. So you can go and say the same thing here. You can go to this option, say levels, and change the levels here as many times as you want, and reducing that. And notice how it creates this little sub layer in a way. This also has a frame, so you can say black and white, yes, here, yes, no, but I can always double click on the levels there, and it opens up the same set of properties, so you can change those as well. Okay, so I apply this element, so I can double click here on the little graph, and I change it again. Okay. Go back to the layer. You don't like it, go back, double click, a little less. So it's not a one-time decision. It's a time you can keep changing your mind as many times as you want. And you can do that to any layer you want. I could change this one by adding, let's just say, saturation. I can change that less color, and that adds another setting for that, no? You can put it different. Whatever this element is affecting the layer above it. So you can put it on underneath or above, no? In a way, if you hide the layer, you can see what we're left with. Is with a kind of a, if I had gone with a brush all around, erasing some stuff and not others. So that's what pretty much was done. Okay, so we can double click on that element and you can just take it back, and you can do that as many times as you need. Okay. And just again, you can have this possibility of bringing people. I'll select with the M tool, Control C, Control V. I don't know where I want this. There it is. I put it above. And you can do the same. Because I'm in that layer, I can do like pin bucket, delete. I could fix these things or whatever. I could say, well, this lady is going to be a little transparent. I'm going to go with a blur quality of this, a box blurry person. Okay, not that you have to. But what if I need the reflection of the lady? So it's a bit more realistic. I can always duplicate that layer. Say, okay, so it's in the same place. I can Control T for transform. I can just either mirror it or rotate it. Probably need to mirror it. So I'm going to right click, Control T, and there's a flip horizontal, flip vertical. Press enter when I'm done and bring it down. And I just can do something like to the new layer, erasing soft with a soft quality. Maybe to that layer a bit transparency. And there you go. So it's a reflection that is very subtle, but it's there, so it gives you a bit more realistic quality. You can even create a new layer, call it shadow for the lady, and you can just do something like, I'm going to use the other lasso tool. And imagine that you can paint that in black. I'm going to paint it with a brush. For black, this is not a great thing, of course, but for that layer, now I can add a little transparency. I can add also a blur box condition. And the thing with transparency, so it's almost there, but not there. There you go. So there's your shadow. So it's kind of a smarty ways of getting to realistic tones. Many students bring silhouettes in black and white. I am recommending that if you bring them, don't place them in black, place them in different tones and try to give some transparency to the individuals you bring. The black, all of them is too kind of a neutral thing. I think if we start thinking of different colors, that they're not very intense, so they give an idea of different people or different individuals, different humans, and then some transparency because you're trying to talk about the space more than the people. So the people are there to give us scale and understand dynamisms, but not necessarily to see the persons, no? Yeah, I'm sure there. I mean, Photoshop is a big thing, so I'm not sure if you have some thoughts or questions. Well, the same would go for if you have a painting and you don't want to place it in Revit, you can just go painting, or whatever. Or you can open it up in Photoshop. Control A will be select all, although in this case I might want to select the M tool to not select the white frame. So Control C, Control V, there it goes. Control T, right click, distort, because you need to kind of accommodate it to the perspective. That should be good. Now, again, because maybe the rest of the render is more pastel tones, you can always go to that one and just make it a little more transparent, so it's a bit more sensitively introduced into the scene. That could be done with the sculptures, art, paintings, or bookshelves, or whatever it is that you're thinking about. The type of people, if you Google whatever persons you need, there's tons of libraries out there, and I'm sure you can ask for students or colleagues of yours to give you some libraries. Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of other things. Any questions, somebody?